Okay, last video for today. And this is, as I said before, it's going to be on opposition to the New Deal. So your book has a heading there for roadblocks and pitfalls is what it's called. If you just want to put opposition to the New Deal, that's fine by me. It's the same thing. But anyway, the New Deal, initially people were excited about the New Deal for the most part, particularly those who were struggling. This goes back to the principle of he who robs Peter to pay Paul is often popular with Paul. Well, to the people that were struggling and needed money, needed a job, and the TVA or the CCC or the WPA gave them a job, well, they were happy about the New Deal. But to those who were being taxed more heavily, because that's where some of the funding came from, was higher income taxes, for those who were being taxed more heavily, for employers who had more regulations imposed upon them, they really weren't a big fan of this. So on the conservative side, if you wanted to look at it politically, and you have the right and the left, we're going to talk about the right first. So if you want to put opposition from the right as a subheading, that'd be a good place to start. But you should know that for the most part, he didn't get opposition from the poor. He got opposition from not necessarily the wealthy, but the employers at least, and somewhat from the wealthy as well. All right, so opposition from the right. So people on the right that didn't like the New Deal, and there were a decent bit of people on the right that were wealthy or were employers or were politicians that just didn't like FDR, who didn't like the New Deal, and their arguments were as follows. It doesn't work. Unemployment is still really high. The economy is still in a downturn. Right? We haven't come back up yet. Debt, lots and lots of debt. So they were basically saying, you're not really doing anything positive, FDR. In fact, you're doing a lot of negative things. And another thing they said was it's socialistic. And they were afraid of socialism. I mean, if you look at the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and America went through a Red Scare already, and we're going to have another Red Scare after World War II. But there's a lot of suspicion about progressivism, socialism, and communism in America. So they didn't like the idea that it's socialistic. They didn't like the expense. They didn't like the debt. Now, let's compare for a minute. Let's look at 2008. And in 2008, we had the economy was crashing in America. And when Obama took over after the 2008 election, and when he starts enacting his policies, we see that there's massive debt. It not only increases the debt, but it increases the budget deficit as well. The unemployment numbers really didn't change a whole lot. People complained that it was socialistic. So there are a lot of comparisons that can be drawn between FDR's New Deal and what could be referred to as the New Deal under the Obama administration with the bailouts. Now, in full disclosure, George W. Bush did some bailouts as well. I'm not trying to play political favorites necessarily. I'm just saying that there are a lot of comparisons that could be drawn here, and the arguments that the conservatives made against the Obama administration in 2008 are very similar to the arguments that were made against FDR back in the early 30s when he was enacting these programs. Now, these are challenged, particularly the NRA and the NIRA. Now, the NIRA is it's pretty much what authorized the NRA. The NIRA is ruled unconstitutional in May of 1935, May 27th. You don't need to know the date. But every single Supreme Court justice agreed that it was unconstitutional. There was no dissent whatsoever. And then the NRA was ruled unconstitutional as well. And it wasn't a unanimous decision, but it was a 6-3 decision, which is still, it's usually not quite that far. It's usually 5-4. But anyway, 6-3 decision struck down the NRA in 1936. So back-to-back years, two major New Deal programs enacted by FDR get shot down by the Supreme Court. And FDR is not very happy about this. No president likes to have their legislation shot down by the Supreme Court. But he's going to try a scheme that you're going to see here a little bit later in the video to pack the Supreme Court. But I'll put you on hold for that. I want to talk about the opposition on the left. So subheading, opposition on the left. This is how it works in anything political. You have the right that thinks that a president is going too far, and you have the left that thinks the president's not going far enough. So in this case, we have several individuals on the left that say FDR is not doing enough. He's not socializing enough. It's not Marxist enough. It's not whatever their claim is. One person that claims this is Huey Long, Huey, last name Long. And he had a share our wealth scheme where the government would basically put a super high tax on the rich, excessively high tax on the rich, so that the poor could take the money from them. Now, of course, this is popular with the poor. A lot of poor people supported Huey Long, but he may have actually been a successful presidential candidate, but he was assassinated before he even had a chance. So, but Huey Long was a big opponent of the New Deal because it just didn't do enough. It didn't go far enough. We're not really going to talk about other people by name, but there were several other people by name that opposed FDR's programs, and some for the issue of the gold standard, that you needed the gold standard back, some for other issues. But anyway, the left, basically their point is you're not doing enough in the socialistic direction. We need more government ownership of businesses. We need more taxes on the rich and more subsidies for the poor. Now, FDR, we're going to talk about court packing now. When he starts losing decisions in the Supreme Court and the New Deal is taking blow after blow in the Supreme Court, he comes up with what he thinks is a genius plan, right? It's ingenious in his mind. And he portrays it like this. Well, the Supreme Court justices are so overworked. They could use a break. Just think about if you were doing your job, or as a student here, think about what if you had, for every homework assignment that you have, there were 2 people to do it, you and one other person to share the load. It'd be great, wouldn't it? Now, that's what he basically said to the Supreme Court justices. Well, you're old, you're tired. Why not let me give you double the justices? Now, he's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. The reason he's doing this is every president gets to appoint Supreme Court justices when one retires or when one dies. Now, if he adds the number of justices, if he had 6 more, or 9 more, or 12 more, or 100 more justices, by the way, the Constitution doesn't say how many Supreme Court justices there are supposed to be. So if he adds more justices, guess who gets to appoint them? Him. And he's going to appoint justices that agree with him politically and that are going to support the New Deal. But there's such a massive public outcry against this that he just drops the whole scheme. All right, now let's look at what's going to go on with the 1936 election. FDR is reelected. For the most part, America still supports him. They really like him. But he's not really doing anything. About a third of the country, third of the population, are underfed, underhoused, have a low-paying job or no job. Really, 28% of everyone in America, 28% of everybody, has no income, period, around this time period. And those that do have employment are starting to unionize, and the unions are pushing for higher wages, which again makes it more difficult for people to get employed, because anytime the wage is raised at a business, money that they could have used to employ someone else goes to make your wage higher if you work there. But just by way of covering something important, the CIO, it's the Congress of Industrial Organizations. It's a new union that's formed. And unions before were usually for skilled labor. They were for people like the Carpenters Union, the Masons Union. They had all kinds of unions for skilled labor. like auto workers, things that it required some like skill to do. The CIO is going to try to organize just plain old industrial labor. So the person that works on an assembly line, just whatever they're doing, if they're tightening screws on something, if they're installing a piece on a car door, they unionize this to try to get bargaining power. And this is going to affect the recovery during FDR's terms as president. So as we get into the next section, keep an eye out for how organized labor has an effect on the recovery with the New Deal. And also keep in mind that we're going to be working our way toward World War II throughout this chapter. It's going to get us right up to the time period where World War II is going to start. Again, if you have any questions, email me. I'm going to Skype in on Thursday. So hopefully I'll be back soon. But until then, we're going to be doing some lessons like this.